Live. Hello, and welcome to Leading with the Feminine or From the Feminine with Kianga Ford. And I've published Kianga's bio, so I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on that. You can read about Kianga in the post in the group about this conversation. If you are here live, drop the word. You can drop a hashtag live down below, letting us know you're here live. If you haven't approved for your name to show with your comment, we won't see who you are. We won't be able to see who you are. So you need to approve showing your name to StreamYard so we can see who you are, because we'd love to talk with you. And secondly, if you're watching the replay, drop a hashtag replay below, because we love knowing who's watched. If you have any questions during the replay, drop them in. We'll be back to answer those at a later time. By the way, we are also live on YouTube. Surprise! So if you're on YouTube, you can do the same. You can also let us know that you're here on YouTube, and you can let us know if you're watching the replay, and we'll come back and check out your comments. Hi, Facebook user who's here live. Who is that? I'd love to know who's here. And if there's a way for you, I'm not sure if while the live stream is running, if you're able to let StreamYard show your name, or if that had to happen before, we'll find out. But we can't see your name. So if you are okay with us knowing who you are, just drop your name in the comments section, because we'd love to know. Happy that you're here on Facebook. Okay, so Kianga and I have known each other for probably 8 years or so, and I just have adored this woman for a very, very long time, and we've been chatting recently, and I love the work that Kianga does around feminine. Oh, great, Barbara Evans. Wonderful. I'm going to just real quick take this film off my camera because I realized I didn't remove that yet. Welcome, Barbara. So great to see you. So Kianga has been telling me a bit about her work around feminine leadership and what it is, what it isn't, misconceptions we have about it, etc. And I just thought, you know what? I got to bring you to my group. So thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. Also, hi, Barb.
I'm so glad you're here, Barb. So, and the other person who's here, welcome. So glad you're here as well. So, Kianga, where do we begin? Say a bit about how you approach feminine leadership and what you've noticed.
Yeah. So I had a frame come to me this morning while I was in the shower, because that's where you get all the good ideas, right?
All the ideas.
That wasn't a frame that I normally use, but I'm like, there's something really golden in that, right? And so I was thinking about those kind of two archetypes that we have. Like, as a woman, I need to be really accommodating. I'm nice. People should like me. So on the one side, there's that nice girl. And I think it's always a nice girl, right? It's always the sort of younger version of ourselves that's trying to please people. And then on the other side, you have that kind of archetype of the domineering woman who is able to be successful in masculine environments, right? That woman is often referred to as the bee, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how you filter for your audience, and it's not a word that's commonly in my vocabulary, but it is kind of what we see, right? So we've got either the domineering bee on one side or the nice girl on the other side. And I think all of us at some point have felt trapped either in the practice or the projection of being one or the other of those, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when I think about feminine leadership, right, it's like, well, what's between those two things? Between those two things is a calibrated ability to be present in the moment and to see your needs and the needs of others simultaneously.
Oh, that is so beautifully said. And that reminds me that if there's something we're talking about and it's a takeaway for you, like you kind of go, whoa, like I just did with that statement, drop a hashtag nugget in the comments and let us know what it is, because we'd love to know what the nuggets are that are really landing for you. And that was a nugget for me. So in between the two, I'm going to say it to see if I get it right. In between the two extremes is the calibrated, and then what? Calibrated, present,
Yeah, that's
calibrated,
exactly the
present.
word I would use.
Yeah.
Calibrated, present, intuitive, um, in the experience, in the process, in the flow. There is an
Oh,
alignment with that moment that
and then you're
matters.
perceiving others' needs as well as your own, you also said, which I think is so brilliant to acknowledge, because there can be a perception. I think one of the mistakes we make is when we step forward more, let's say into more assertiveness, that it can become like my way or the highway, kind of like, I'm going to tell you what I need. Like we kind of go too far sometimes as we're trying to figure out where that middle is. So I love that you built into that description the acknowledgement of your needs and my needs, both needs, all needs matter. Yeah.
Absolutely, because, on the other side of the nice girl, it's everybody else's needs and not mine,
Right.
right? And then on the sort of B end of the spectrum, there's the, like, only my needs or my way or my vision or my sight.
Yes. Yes. And neither is ideal.
Neither really works.
Yeah.
And neither is really a representation of what it is to lead from the feminine. I think a lot of times the misperception is that those two poles that I've described, so that if you're on the domineering end, you're on the masculine end, which would lead people to believe that if you're on the feminine end, you might be on the nice girl end. But that's not it either, right?
Yes. Yes. Can you unpack that more? Because I think that's a spot where women get really confused, especially as they're making the transition into allowing more of the feminine into the space, because we've
Mhm,
been so masculinized
mhm,
as a culture. We all the markers of success sort of are masculine traits, so to speak. Um, and so there can be a resistance to bringing more feminine in, because the perception is it has to be nice and accommodating, and B, we can skew a little too far in that direction, thinking we're doing what's called of us.
mhm. Yeah. And I mean, brava for us that we've arrived at a moment where we feel like everybody already understands the masculinization of culture,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
5 years ago, that wasn't the case. When I was talking about this, I really always made sure to start from the very beginning, right? Of like, well, what does it mean for us to be masculinized in culture? What does it mean for women to be so focused on producing results, on goal orientation, right? On the consciousness, on the thought, on the awareness. And so, great. I've just thrown in a couple of terms. If you're somebody watching and you're not already familiar with like what it is to be very masculinized, but again, brava for us that we've gotten to a point where we can start to address that. And then one of the things I think is so important about the feminine is it's not a new template, right? So if you feel like you're putting yourself in a new box, like, okay, now I'm going to bring more of the feminine and I'm going to be more flowy and more nice, you haven't hit it, right? If you're just wearing a new mask, a new suit, you haven't hit it. If your needs are not being accounted for, you haven't hit it,
Yeah.
right?
If you're just
And
putting on goddess wear, you haven't hit it.
Oh, Instagram and the goddess wear.
Oh my God. I can't. Yeah.
It's like, oh my goodness, we all look like we're there. But, right, the work is so much more internal, and we laugh because we know that, right? And
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
goddess wear is also super fun.
It's
Enjoy,
fun. I mean,
right?
I have some pieces in my closet. I'm not going to lie.
It's wonderful. I have these new, like, little gold leaves that, like, I can attach in my bun, and I really love those.
Mm.
Very much in the genre of goddess wear, right? So we enjoy that, but when we come in to really understand what it means, it doesn't mean that we're showing up in the boardroom wearing flowy things, right?
Right.
Like, and there's something about the nice that is really resonant with our cultural perception that the feminine position is a disempowered position, right?
Oh man, say more about that. Mhm.
If I move more toward the feminine, and the reason that a lot of women who are aiming for success don't move toward the feminine is because it looks like that place where you get walked on, right? It looks like that place where you just accommodate everybody else's needs. It looks like that, like, bone dry maternal that has just
Mm.
given all of the inside to the outside world, to the people in your field, to your communities, to your families, right? That's just kind of desiccated inside because all the pouring has been a pouring out. So, a lot of times I find that women in leadership positions have kind of decided that while the hyper masculine might not be a great fit, feeling like they would come over here and be drained or walked on, kind of trapped in mm, the framework of niceness is
Mhm.
completely unappealing, right? Because that feels like
Understandably so.
unsatisfying on so many levels, right?
Yeah, especially if that's not how you're wired. Like you're not, you know, there's a piece around softness that's occurring to me,
Mhm.
sort of the way we kind of can tend to confuse soft with weak.
Right.
And there's a second piece occurring. I feel like I was so lucky growing up because I had one example of a as I'm listening to you speak, she is coming to my mind so strongly. And she was a friend of the family. She lived in the same building. She ran a big real estate like rental company, like a real estate company in New York. And they owned multiple buildings and they rented. I actually rented an apartment when I moved back to New York from her company. And she was a woman who always was impeccable in the traditional suits. So she didn't, the hair, the suits, always impeccably put together
Mhm.
in a way that's not, I'm in a t-shirt. Hello. I guess it's not. But she never felt masculine to me. She felt incredibly, she always dealt with people with kindness. So we
Mhm.
might want to make a distinction between kind and nice, might be a useful distinction for us to make. But she also, you knew you couldn't fuck with her. But she never had to say that or be strident about it or be hard. There was a
Mhm.
difference between hardness and firmness.
Mhm.
And she just was a person who got things done in I believe she really had this middle place between these two polarities that we're talking about nailed. So I feel lucky to have actually seen someone like that in
Mhm.
my life. And I
Mhm.
want to acknowledge not many of us have gotten to see it, someone like that.
Right. Because, one of the things we talked about when trying to describe, "Hey, what are we gonna talk about today?" Right, is kind of that phenomenon where we're seeing more and more women in leadership positions, right? More and more women getting access to the C-suite, more and more women. Of course, we haven't gotten to parity yet, right? But we see women playing a much greater role in the public sphere, a much greater role in the professional sphere. But we haven't actually seen so much of the feminine come to town yet, right?
Yes.
And so it's that distinction. It's that place. I love the last set that you offered. You offered hard and firm, and how that resonated for me was hard and clear, right? There's a clarity that doesn't require hardness.
Yes.
Right? It's like
Exactly.
a lot of this is the inquiry of where are you coming from, right? So nice is often performative. Nice is quite transactional. Nice is quite
Zipping
frankly,
it.
it's frankly manipulative,
It
right?
is. You're
You
trying
are
to manipulate the other person's experience of you.
exactly, exactly. So it's really hard to be seated in your own authenticity, in your own awareness of the experience, your awareness of your needs and the needs of others, and also be in the nice seat, right? Whereas kind is really that thing that we're talking about, which is I can see and recognize your needs. I can see and recognize both my needs, and both will be attended to in the context of this interaction, right?
Yes.
That's kind. Kindness, clarity is also a kindness, right? I don't have to be hard with my boundary, but when I'm very clear with my boundary, that just leaves you to respond, right? It leaves you, the other person, to respond, to deal with themselves. It doesn't leave them manipulated into a particular way of behaving or responding.
Completely. Can you say more about how that kind of clarity is a kindness? Can you unfold that a bit more? Because I think we definitely have nice and kind, often very jumbled together. And it's really helpful to tease them apart in this
Mhm.
way as people are trying to navigate how much do I say? How direct do I be? What do I share? What do I hold back? That kind of thing.
I mean, this might be a leap that you'd like to save for later, but I'm thinking of the woman that asked the question on your thread about
Mm,
eye contact,
yeah.
right? Do you mind if we jump there?
I'd love to jump there. I think direct examples are great. So, a childhood friend of mine shared a question about how to handle cross cultural implications of eye contact. Like if you're working in contexts where women traditionally have had a subservient role in that culture, how do you navigate being direct and forthcoming with your eye contact when you're dealing with people from a different culture than our dominant culture in this country? And secondly, the suggestive or sexual aspect, like when eye contact gets misinterpreted as interest. Um,
Mhm.
so that's the context for what we're about to talk about.
Yeah. And so there is a clarity that I believe is actually connected to intuition, which is connected to being present in the moment, right? Which is, we're not going to write a new script for how to do that. We're actually going to bring online self trust. We're going to bring online environmental awareness, right? We're going to bring online the balance between my needs and the needs of others, right? And it's in that intersection that I'm going to be able to make a moment to moment decision about what feels resonant here,
Hmm.
right? And so the reason that I talk about that in relationship to talking about nice and kind and hard and clear, and the value of clear, right, is as you move toward hard, there's the rigidity of the systems and the structures and the way that you do things, which is actually quite masculine, right? Those rails, those understandings of it's this and not that, right? The masculine is actually the energy of no. It's the energy of exclusion. The feminine is the energy of yes, it's the energy of inclusion. So it's the ability to hold competing ideas in the same moment, right? There's an idea that respect means making direct eye contact. There's also an idea that respect means not making direct eye contact. And actually, the feminine can hold contradiction. That's part of its capacity. It's part of its multivalence. And so then it becomes the play with the moment, right?
Mm.
What is needed? What is needed for me? What is needed with the other person? And I think when you have that kind of clarity versus the hardness of like, here's the new rule set, right? Like we do this in Jakarta, we do this in New York, is that it allows for the feminine value of being an experience, of being in process to also rise to the surface, right? There are
Mm.
just so
Mhm.
many small steps that we can make that start to bring the feminine online, right? It's really important to me that it's not a new set of rules for behavior.
Exactly, because we're just going from one set of rules to another set of rules, isn't it? It's still missing the mark.
And that's a bit what we've already done, right? Like these are rules for male only workplaces. These are rules for gender diverse workplaces, right? But the fact that we moved from one rule set to another rule set that isn't based on sort of the dynamics of the moment means that we are in just a new masculine template,
Mhm.
right? Feminine hasn't yet arrived.
Hasn't yet arrived. And as you were just saying that, two things popped in my mind. And the first is how much more self-trust is required. Like we turn to rules because most of us don't have access to our own organic rightness or
Yeah.
self-trust. And so rules are this externally imposed way for us to know what to do because we don't feel what to do intrinsically a lot of the time. And
Right.
secondly, I feel like there's a piece around the role of embodiment and the feminine that's important to bring in here because when we're not embodied, we also can't feel the moment.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that a bit? Both of those?
I mean, just the whole world. I could do it in about 3 minutes. Um,
You're so brilliant. I bet you could. So,
so, when I look at that first piece about rules, right? You can really use rules, an external set of rules to figure out if you're being nice. I don't think you can use an external set of rules to discover if you're being kind, right? Because kind really has to do with the internal impulse to connect, right? To connect, to see, to be seen. And so you can't really run a thing through oh, did it look like this? Did it look like this? Did I get a gift card and did I sign it? Right? Like you can use those kind of metrics to discover if you've been nice.
mm,
Um, so I think really moving into the present moment, which does require, right? Like it's great that we start with a conversation about an example about the gaze because that's very much an embodied experience. Where do I put my eyes in this moment?
right.
You know?
Yeah.
Which frankly I often have that question during interviews because it's like at the little green dot or the person that I'm trying to
I
connect
know.
with. I
Because if I
usually
look
choose
at the
the
green
person.
dot, it looks like I'm looking at the person, but then I'm not tracking what their face. Yeah.
Exactly. Not actually using the moment in the same way. And
Yeah.
so it is just that. It's about remembering to come back to the moment. And if you come back to the body, you come back to the moment, right?
Mm.
You can ask really simple questions like, where are my eyes? Right?
I like that.
Ask questions like, we're very familiar with this question. What is the highest sensation that I'm experiencing in my body right now? When I ask that, highest is only relative. It's just me with my body scanning for relative levels. Right now, for me, it is a kind of pulsing heat in my throat.
Mm. Yeah, for me, I have a little tension just under the occiput in the back of my neck because I'm leaning forward, right? So my neck is working extra hard.
Yeah. And so that return to the moment, but also how much self-trust is required for that.
Yeah.
When I work with women on feminine leadership, there's a whole rewiring. You have to get right with your body, you have to come into the moment, you have to get right with your body in the moment. Um, there's so much that's going on. You have to get right with your own desire. You have to get
Mm.
right with your impulses. And that is not where we're taught to lead from, especially as women, right? You tamp that down and you make clear decisions and you do the thing that needs to be done, right?
Yeah.
And so the repatriation of those other ways of knowing, those other kinds of intellects are really critical for feminine leadership. They're really central.
Mm. So how would you recommend someone who's been working in a, let's say, a masculine dominant context and who wants to start bringing more of this in for her own wholeness, really?
Mhm.
Where would you suggest she begin? Because, like, she's not going to immediately change the culture of the company, but she can start showing up in some different ways that shift things subtly over time and maybe dramatically. But like, where would you suggest somebody start?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first thing you already implied, right, is you start with yourself. You don't
Mhm.
start with, like, ushering feminine culture into your organization. I mean, it sounds funny, like, a lot of that, right? Like, we're going to usher this thing that we don't personally embody into our organizations. I mean,
And the
just look at
world. Yeah,
with the DEI conversations, right? Like, we're
totally.
gonna usher a lot of things that no one really understands and no one really embodies
Yeah.
yet, right? We're on our way. So the first answer is you start with you. You don't start with your company and you don't start with the things that look like leadership, right? You don't
Mm.
start with like your company growth decisions. You just start with you and the way you show up day to day, moment to moment. I realize that's still at a fairly high level of abstraction. The next place that I'd go is someplace that I think you also return to, at the epicenter of your work, which is desire.
Mm.
One of the first places to get square with yourself is getting right with a thing that you desire,
Mm.
moment to moment. And there's so much power in that. We're not trained to trust our desire, but our desire is giving us so much information about the circumstance that we're in, about ourselves, about our needs, about the deeper level soul needs that are coming through us, right? The deeper level soul capacities that are coming through us. And so there's a really rich conversation to be had in the frame of desire. And I find that female leaders, more than other women, in fact, have shut that door to desire.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm a decision
Because
maker.
there's,
I
yeah,
don't have time for desire. That can't be
right.
the priority. I
I
can't be
have to
doing.
produce. I got to get shit done. Like, I
Yeah,
don't have time to wallow in feelings, something, right? That can be the perception.
right? Feelings or the kind of extraneous indulgence of personal desire, right?
Mm.
There's no time for that. There's no space for that. I'll do that on vacation, which also they don't do, by the
Also
way.
not happening on vacation.
Because
Yeah.
it's like a muscle, right? It's
Yeah.
not gonna be like, "Oh, I'm not gonna use my bicep for the next 6 months, and then I will do an Ironman," which is kind of what I tried to do during COVID, right? Like, I'm just not gonna
Yeah.
use it.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, come back
That's
online
such
and
a
we'll
great
work with it.
image. Yeah. And then all of a sudden I'm going to just like, yeah, yeah, totally. So, yeah, the other thing too is especially if the woman leader is the primary breadwinner of the family, or if she's if not the primary breadwinner, an equal breadwinner in a family, there can be this perception of like, I'm doing for my family. I don't have time for this me shit, which is a whole other thing to unpack. What a beautiful learning it is for your family when you understand that your needs matter as much as everyone else's do, and learning to consider everyone's needs, including your own, is a beautiful teaching for the whole family. I wonder if that's something that you see too, is this sort of pressure because, maybe they are the primary breadwinner or the primary, or they're solo or they're single and they're got to make sure that they're covered themselves, right?
Yeah.
And how that plays in.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a common part of the cultural myth of what it means to be feminine and what it means to be maternal, right?
Yeah.
What does it mean to be
And
a
what it
mom?
means to be successful. Yeah.
And so there's a lot of self-sacrifice, particularly built into the maternal model. And so I find that a question that often just really cuts to the heart of that is, do you want your daughters to feel the way you feel right now?
Hashtag nugget. You want your daughters to feel the way you feel right now. Yes.
Right? And that's different than the metrics of like, what do we have and what have I accomplished? You want them to feel the way you feel right now, because that's actually the template that you're laying down. That's the track that they're about to follow.
Mm-hmm. That's gorgeous and does cut right to the chase. It's so good. So those of you who are watching live, you are welcome to drop any questions or comments in the chat. We'd love to have a conversation. How is this landing? What is it sparking for you? Is there anything you would like us to go into more deeply? We'll keep talking as we wait for your comments to come in, but please know you're invited to be a part of and influence the direction of this conversation with
Yeah,
your input.
absolutely.
Yeah, so we've talked about some of the pitfalls and we've talked about some of the confusions. What does it look like? Let's I talked a bit about Joanne. I didn't say her name before, but this woman I grew up knowing, who always impressed me with her clarity and her professionalism that never felt masculine, and always felt kind. She was clear, kind, and took no nonsense, and it was very clear to me that she had this nexus of feminine, masculine ways of being in the workplace nailed more than anyone I have seen, really. I mean, maybe not today, but at least growing up, she was really an incredible example of that. Fast forward to today, 2023, like, what does it look like to do? Can you have any examples, maybe even if it's a celebrity, so we can all kind of know who we're thinking of, who embodies these qualities in an effective way?
Well, I didn't expect that question, but you're going to take me to one of my favorites, right? It's Michelle Obama.
Ah, me too.
And why, right? She's really clear what she's not a yes to. Folks, she's not going to be running in the next election. She's already said that. Some of you are still hopeful. It's not going to happen. She has a kind of clarity without having hardness, right? And she's always telling you, showing you how she's navigating the line between meeting her own needs and meeting the needs of others.
And how much flack she got for that in the White House by people who did not understand what she was doing, because she's supposed to be nice as a first lady.
Yes. And, that also introduces all of the complexities of race that also come into that.
Exactly.
You've got to be doubly nice because you have to be seen as accommodating.
Right. Can't be the angry Black woman,
And, of course, we heard some people describing her as just that.
As just
And
that, right, which I never felt she was, but yeah. Yeah.
but we understand the cultural context where that gets read, right? And so you don't really think of Michelle in a lot of goddess wear. That's not really.
Sorry, I wasn't expecting that.
It's not a requirement. So when I'm looking for what does feminine leadership look like, it's the clarity of family is the priority in the schematic of our values, right? I am my own priority in order to show up for that. She's also feeling for context all the time. What are people needing? That last book was very much in the context of the isolation and despair that came along with COVID for a lot of people. What is the thing that they most need to see and the message they most need to hear? Okay, the light in themselves. She's not saying like, okay, I decided when I was 22 that I was going to write 3 books. They were going to address these 3 themes, right? She didn't even say that coming out of the White House. There's a constant touching in with what is needed and what matters. What is needed and what matters.
That book just felt so right for the times, like exactly on the spot. I so agree. Both books, really, but especially The Light We Carry, just you can tell it was written in response to the moment, and it was so true to her.
And there's like exactly when you say true to her, the word that was coming to me is there's a transparency.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a transparency and an unwillingness to be locked in an icebox. I don't have to be nice. I'm really clear and I'm really self-evaluative. I'm willing to share with everyone how I'm making these decisions, the way she goes into how she knew this was the man to marry, right? Just really beautiful, so present. And she talks about her own reckoning, right? With going with the guy from Hawaii to like the Hawaii postcard to being in this like small flat with a man and his family and not being able to spend as much time at the beach as she'd imagined because she's got to come back and be with the man who is being with his family and really being able to see like, oh, those are the things that are compelling for me. I know actually my values. I'm reading the moment. I'm not fitting into a picture and I'm not building my life from a picture. Even a picture of what a leader should look like. So many of us are trying to fill the picture of what a leader should look like. And because we have so few models of feminine leadership, that is very dangerous.
Say more about that.
Well, it's what we talked about at the top of the conversation. When we fill the picture that already exists, we end up in a very masculine model and we end up in very masculinized versions of ourselves. We may have in fact fit the picture, we may have filled the shoes, but it got us someplace that isn't necessarily supportive or conducive to our own wholeness.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think another thing that's coming up for me to address, I'll throw it out and you can tell me how you feel about it, is the kind of zero sum, the either or, the 0 or 100, right? So you're either 100% masculine or you're 100% feminine, right? You're either like 100% feminine and so 0% masculine, or 100% masculine and so 0% feminine. And that's not true for anybody, right? We're all carrying both masculine and feminine energies, components, elements of our disposition. And what we're trying to do is increase our ability to consciously move along the range and to get closer to what I call our organic set point. Right?
Mm-hmm.
We've all been in all this adaptation, right? Like the masculinization is an adaptation. We're doing that to be more successful in our context, whatever those contexts are. Sometimes that was our family of origin, right? And they were very focused on success metrics and external metrics and ways of being seen. And so that masculine adaptation can literally start from birth. But what we're looking for is what's the organic set for each individual, right? And how do they have both the consciousness and the self trust to move along the continuum? Sometimes you'll be stretched away from yourself.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's great. That just means you're cultivating more range. But
Yeah.
to know where yours is and to understand then how to refuel yourself. It's like, introversion, extroversion is so commonly understood now. And we know that introverts are not going to fill themselves up at like big multi day events, right? With like thousands of people. That's not the thing. The feminine isn't going to refill with a weekend chock a block full of different scheduled events, right? And so we just get to learn more and more about what is needed to support the person that we organically are. Doesn't mean that we're not growing, doesn't mean that we're resting on our laurels like, oh, this is me. I'm 70% feminine, 30% masculine, so I can't do that over there. Right? Like that's no new prescriptions, right? Let's remember that we started with that. There are no new templates, there are no new prescriptions. There's just really this way of coming to understand where are you coming from and what do you need to be the most expressed version of yourself, right? The most
Mhm.
realized version of yourself. So I think it's
That's
really important.
beautifully said. Yeah, no, I'm so glad you brought that in, and there can be, I'm with you, there can be this sort of extreme of like, well, if I'm not supposed to be that. Like, okay, I'm not supposed to be masculinized. I need to go over here and be hyper feminine. But not everybody is wired. I'm not a hyper feminine woman. I'm never going to be hyper feminine, but I am feminine, in my qualities and in how I replenish. And I'm very intuitive and I, embodied and all of that. And so, but I'm never going to be a hyper feminine woman. That's just me. If I go that direction, that's me trying to do the rules thing, like substituting one set of rules for those set of rules, which is still not the thing. So I really appreciate that you brought in, like, it's about really listening and discerning for yourself what your ideal mix is and where you could expand your range. Because, it's making me think of the kind of energetic agility that's needed in different situations, meaning, like, we don't bring the same person home for Thanksgiving dinner with our family as we do to the bar on Friday night. Like, we have different aspects of ourselves that we bring to the forefront to calibrate, to use that word again, to calibrate in different situations. It's not chameleon. We're not abandoning ourselves, but the idea is that we're allowed to have some energetic agility between the different aspects of us, which are all us. And so the more of us we know, the more of ourselves we're familiar with, then the more agency we have to, oh, let me dial up this, let me dial back that, let me bring this mix to this situation. And it becomes fun, I think. It becomes like a fun game to see which aspect of ourselves is going to best meet a situation where we're still true, like we're not chameleoning, we're not abandoning ourselves, but we're still true to ourselves, but we're heightening what's going to meet the moment the best, right? I wanted to highlight this comment, but do you want to respond to that first?
Let's go with a comment. I'll come back.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to highlight this beautiful comment.
Oh,
This is the kind of leadership I want to embody in my own business and with my team. And I feel sometimes assailed by the culture at client companies who are very rush, must be productive at all times kind of cultures. I'm sensing that clarity of purpose and intention may be the path to how I feel less assailed.
yeah. I love that. I was listening to a book recently that said something like, the road to hell is paved with the pursuit of volume.
That's good.
I thought, oh yeah, that's just pretty brilliant, right? Like that rush, more. And the feminine looks for resonance, right? So I really appreciate that underscoring. And it isn't going to be ultimately less contributive. And I use contributive versus productive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
production is often measured in volume, right?
Yeah.
Like, what's the number, how many units, right? It's that quantitative. Whereas when we look at constructive, right, like when we look at contribution, contributive, we can look at the quantitative aspects of that and also see that we're also going to be able to get places with those measures, right? We're going to be able
Yes.
to make impact, to have change. And it doesn't mean that the numbers go away, right? It isn't one or the other. I think one of the things I love the way that comment just kind of brought me back to the thing that I was thinking about. I was thinking about the difference between capacity and alignment, right?
Mm.
That we have the capacity to operate in these very masculinized frameworks is very seductive in our 30s, because it's like, what can we get good at, right? And the 20s too, but especially the 30s, because that's like the really sort of like dropping in, anchoring into, this is the mark I'm going to make in my field, right? But what happens when you start to see that there is an alignment is that fatigue that starts to set in often in the 40s. Like, oh, I've pulled off a lot of miracles and I've, kind of made it to all these benchmarks. And whoa, I'm tired. I'm so
I'm
tired.
so
Right?
tired. I hear that a lot. Yeah, I
Uh-huh.
hear that a lot.
I feel dry from the inside. Is this all there is? Right? Like, those are all the metrics. Those are all the indicators that we're not sitting in our organic type, right? We're not
Mm.
actually sitting in our most sustainable resources.
Yeah.
And the same is true on the other side, right? We're also feminizing men in culture, and they are finding that quite constraining and compressive and unsustainable as
And
well.
confusing. I think there's a
Definitely
mass confusion happening.
definitely that.
Yeah.
For me, this is the line where all the things come together, right? There's not
Mm.
a lot that you can't look at through the masculine feminine lens, and so it's why I give so much of my attention to it, right? I think of the masculine and feminine not as two template ways of being, but as the dual forces of creation, right? To make anything, we need these two energies. How do they work together? I love your language and your framework of relationship alchemy, right? What is the alchemy that's made possible by the interplay of these two energies?
And I often, thank you, I appreciate that. And I often, because we can get so confused around gender
Mhm,
versus masculine, feminine principles,
mhm,
I will often substitute doing as and being as a
mhm,
way to convey some of the similar things we're talking about without the confusion of like, but I'm a woman, I should be feminine, kind of thing that can happen. And I too love the dance. I mean, I trained for many years in a tradition called Kashmir Shaivism, which is a non-dual Hindu tradition, and it's all like Shiva Shakti, like that's what creates the universe is the interplay of consciousness and movement,
mhm.
consciousness and creation of
Experience.
things,
Yeah.
experience, and found myself teaching at the retreat like you're both the creator of your experience and the experience that's happening. You're both things. And so how do you be aware of that and live that, you know, purposefully and with power? owning both those polarities within yourself. So I think there's so many ways to talk about these things that we're bringing up that have been so historically out of balance in our culture and are
And
starting to
misunderstood.
and misunderstood and confused with the gendered body,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So I'm so glad you brought that piece in, because it is really, we each have an individual mix of these polarities within ourselves, and it's really about figuring out what that mix is.
Totally. And so many of us are in these upside down, and then we get in relationships. And so I'm upside down and you're upside down, and we match when we're both upside down. But if we actually want to rate it, we both have to completely do 180 simultaneously. And that's really hard.
It's really
Ergo,
hard.
loads of relational splits, right?
Yeah.
And so really coming to understand your own internal organic balance is a kindness, and a kindness that allows you to engage with opportunities, relationships, right? Everything from the organization that you lead to the partner that you have, from a place of more generation, right? Of more sustainability, of actually greater yield and greater fit, because you can
Yeah.
keep going. I was
And
totally upset,
alignment. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. As was I.
Up
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't actually know how feminine I was, right?
Really.
No, I had no idea. I mean, I've always liked things like dance, I'm highly intuitive. But no, when I left my academic teaching career, so my background is as a university professor. When I left my academic teaching career, I had like the proverbial corner office in New York City, and I ran a fine art program, and almost all the men that I knew worked for me or reported to me in some way, right? All the men that I regularly interacted with. I was teaching in Turkey, and we were all giving nicknames. I was just called the Sultan, right? Because I just, like, I was kind of always directing things and always like putting the rails around things. And there was
Mm.
a way that like I was very connected to the people and sort of the relational feelings underneath things. It was important, but it wasn't the first thing that people saw,
Mm.
right? And so, kind of fast forward a decade, and if I was in a kind of 20% feminine, 80% masculine, then I now live much more in an 80% feminine, 20% masculine place. And I love knowing that there's an elasticity to that, that that's
Yes.
not a new prison for me. Some
Mm.
days I'm also in a highly masculine place. I'm getting a lot of things ordered. I'm using a very linear kind of thinking, but I also know what conditions need to be present for me to go all the way to that 100% feminine, and it's golden.
Yeah.
I had no idea, you know? I
Mm.
didn't know how to renew myself because I didn't know that about myself.
That's such a beautiful admission. Thank you. Yeah, it's beautifully said. So we have a nugget here that someone shared:
Love
dual
nuggets.
forces of creation. Hashtag
Yeah.
nugget. Yeah, so it's beautiful that idea of that these two forces are really the dual, and they're both needed. This is well, I may be opening Pandora's box here, and we do need to wrap in a minute, but this is why I hate, might be too strong a word, but it might not be,
Let's
the
see.
whole the future is female thing.
Oh,
I
space.
hate that, because I'm like, the future is not, it's integrated. The future
We
is
would be in real trouble. Do you
real
want to be on
trouble.
a plane and they say, "We're only gonna use the left wing from here on out"? No, you do
No,
not. You're going down.
exactly. Like, no. And eh, so I mean, but it's the resentment and the anger and the centuries of disempowerment that's causing people to, lash out like the future is feminine because we've been so harmed. Yeah, well, you're still a dick. No. So not in charge till we learn how to integrate, like
What's so interesting is
trading
those
one jerk
signs,
for another jerk is not the thing.
yeah, and those signs rarely say the future is feminine, which even
Right.
feels slightly more hopeful. They usually say the future is female, which just evinces so many different levels of not understanding. But yeah, look, it, we wouldn't, I mean, there are some parallels, there are also distinctions, but I think we would see if we saw the future is black. What are you gonna do with all the other people? Right?
Yeah.
Like, the aim is that we can all show up here in our wholeness, in our fullness. That's what the kind of evolutionary project of humanity requires, the evolution of consciousness. We've seen so many moments historically where one dominating class has been replaced with another dominating class. And, you know, that's the beauty of a project like Mandela's, which says if we supplant, right, like one stream of domination for another stream of domination, we will find ourselves back here in the same place.
Exactly. Exactly. Beautifully said. That feels like a beautiful spot to wrap. And I invite you to share any final thoughts you have for our audience, if you desire.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. For a while, I thought that was going to be an invitation to someone besides me. So I was in listening mode. Then I was like, oh, wait, that was for me.
That was for you.
So I would love to ask while I give my words, just for if there are still people watching live, what's the one thing that you're taking away? Right. And
Yeah,
let's
and
see
if
if
you're
maybe,
watching the replay, please share that too.
yeah, exactly. Thank you for adding that. I think it's actually in response to what we were just talking about the future is female and about the hundreds of years of oppression. And I think I started this work actually working exclusively with men on masculinity because that's
Mhm.
where I saw the greatest injury and the greatest need. And I think the one thing that I really want people to understand is that men have also suffered in the patriarchy. They may have ended up with what looks like more toys, but there is a psychic cost. Anytime we are out of balance, there is a psychic cost to everyone. And so that that premise of supplantation, that premise of you've had your time, now sit down and shut up and we'll have ours, is really to misunderstand all of the injury that has been part of their experience along the entire way, right? They've also been trapped in very limited frameworks of what it means to be a man, what it means to be masculine, what it means to be successful, what it means to be a successful provider. And so our evolution requires really mutual compassion.
Mm. Amen. Amen. Thank you for this takeaway, clarity rather than hardness, and also tuning in for resonance and alignment. That's a beautiful takeaway. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you,
And
Facebook user.
thank you, Facebook user. And those of you who will catch the replay, we'd love to see your takeaways as well. I've just so loved this conversation. Thank you so much for coming in here into the group and having this convo with me. It feels super necessary. And I adore you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me. And I really love the synergy of the way what you do aligns with what I do. So it was really nice to have this conversation and meet some of your community today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So until next time, folks, remember that a great relationship, a great life, it all begins with you. That's the alchemy. Thank you.